Welcome to EB5 Investment Voice, where attorney insights intersects with immigration investments. If you are a foreign investor, domestic fund manager, or enterprising entrepreneur and want to get the most out of the EB5 program, you have come to the right place. I'm Mark Deal, and I'll be your co-host on this journey. I'm joined by your host, Mona Shaw, and other attorneys at Mona Shaw & Associates, as well as immigration leaders from around the world. So let's get into EB5 Investment Voice. Mona, Rebecca, how are you doing today?
We are well. I hope you are staying safe.
Staying as safe as possible. Just had a great 4th of July weekend while social distancing. Rebecca, I realize you're in the UK right now.
Yes, we are. And it's doing the same thing, social distancing.
And I'm sure celebrating 4th of July as much as we are, although maybe from a different side.
On my own.
Exactly. All right, so let's get right down to it. We've had a lot of requests lately from people on how to set up their own EB5 project. You know, it's not something that we talk a lot about on the show. Obviously, we talk to funds and project developers and project managers. But Mona, Rebecca, since I have both of you on, the experts in this, how difficult is it for somebody to set up their own EB5 project?
Well, Mark, it's really interesting that you say that because entrepreneurial projects, or a lot of people may know it as standalone EB5 projects, even before COVID, were really popular. Even more so now that the investment amount increased from $500,000 to $900,000 last November. And I think everyone can still remember that deadline, still recovering from that. But Mona, why was it not feasible for investors to establish their own project at $500,000 versus now where we're at $900,000?
Actually, Rebecca, I'm not sure feasible is the right terminology because there were circumstances where 500 was feasible and it was your own project. I think what the entrepreneur, what the investor really needs to look at is the financial burden to the company that is required for 10 direct employees. When somebody tries to do their own project, using only 500,000, by the time they do calculate 10 direct employees at something like a minimum wage of, say, $15 an hour, even $10 an hour, they start to see that 500,000 doesn't get you very far.
Exactly. It eats away from the 500,000 very quickly. I think we've done calculations and it's well over 300,000 that you're using in just salary.
That's just within the first couple of years. Mm-hmm. It goes back to the fact that is the project credible? And if you are only putting in 500,000 without any operating income coming back, then it's not credible. And we have done enough businesses of all sizes to see that there are very, very few projects which start paying back immediately. Most do not.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's important is, like you said, you may be able to get the 10 jobs with 500,000, but I find it very difficult. We've seen projects where it was barely making the 500,000 level, and you really didn't need 10 full-time positions at times to run these businesses.
Well, that was usually the case. I remember speaking with a couple who had this idea of going forward with this Baskin-Robbins franchise, and they were so excited when they showed me the financials and how much profit they would be making. But then when I looked down at employees, it said 2, and of which one was part-time. So when I pointed that out, I said, look, this is going to eat into your profit. This is something you really have to take note of. Saying that, Rebecca and Mark, 900,000 may not be enough either. Sometimes it works. I would say a lot of times it works, and it's definitely a lot better than 500. But here again, you have to look at operational costs and profitability.
But at the same time, at least USCIS, when they increased the fees, at least it didn't increase the job count either. So you're still with 10 full-time positions that we have to show. And so it's a lot easier to have that.
Right. Well, there's a lot of advantages of doing your own project, and I think that's why people do come. I think for many people, 900, it's never 900. It's always almost $1 million by the time you've added in other costs, closing costs, legal costs, etc. And that's a lot of money for someone to put into a regional center project where they have no control for some people. For others, they don't have the ability to do their own entrepreneurial project, and so they don't want to do that, and they would rather do a passive investment.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. I agree with investors not knowing or having a business to do on their own, or they don't have the time to even think of their own project.
Right. So this is to answer your question, Mark. I know people ask how easy and difficult it is, and I think it would be a good idea if we just run through the steps very briefly, just to show to our listeners that, yeah, it isn't difficult, but it's also very difficult.
That makes complete sense. Well, Mona, Rebecca, let's start here, the creation of a business. Now, I know investors that are coming into the U.S., sometimes they want to get a head start with their EB-5 by creating a business from scratch, a brand new business. Perhaps they're looking at buying a business or buying an established franchise, an operating location. Surely that would bring, cash flow a bit faster because there's already systems and people in place. But does that work for EB-5?
Well, yes, it does, Mark, and there's a big caveat. Yeah, there is a caveat. If you recall, last week, we did discuss the different EB-5 projects with Aaron. He did mention that businesses are becoming more popular because, again, this is the reason people want to put their own, establish their own up, or even look at a business for the operational capital and not necessarily put their money in real estate right now. The issue is, yes, if you want to buy a running business, unless it's a troubled business, which is a whole different ballgame and a different topic for a different podcast, you can buy a business. However, your purchase, you still have to create 10 new permanent positions. And Rebecca, don't we get this question all the time?
Yes, all the time. I have investors or clients who come to me and say, well, I purchased a company. It already has 30 jobs, so I'm good for EB-5. But the whole point of the EB-5 program is job creation. So you have to show new job creation.
That's right. That is the issue which people don't realize. And they often say, well, okay, can I just fire all the people in the company and then rehire? And again, there are circumstances when sometimes some of that might work again if it's a troubled business or such. But USCIS will do their homework, and they will, if you're buying an existing business, they will check up. They will see how many positions were there before. Most likely, they would easily be able to get access to how many employees have been on the books, and they would realize that, no, you're not creating a new position at all.
Yeah, we actually saw that, Mona. We actually received an RFU, a hotel, purchased a hotel, expanded it to include a restaurant,
oh, yes,
10 full-time new jobs. But there was a previous restaurant, which was closed. So we had to explain that to USCIS. But at the same time, USCIS does their homework, and they went back and saw that there was a restaurant prior. And why was it that this hotel was including, were these new jobs that the hotel was actually completing?
Right.
You're right. And as Rebecca said from last week's episode with Aaron, hopefully the troubled business guidelines will be relaxed somewhat with COVID, but that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see what happens in the months to come. But right now with the current troubled business guidelines, it does make it hard to save jobs. And otherwise you do have to create jobs. And it sounds like you just can't be sneaky about it and fire everybody on Friday and rehire them on Monday.
You are going to hear a lot from me about this because I am actually convinced that USCIS really doesn't understand how businesses operate. And I believe that the EB-5 should be bifurcated and you should have the business portion separated and perhaps going to the Department of Commerce and not USCIS.
As someone who's written about 1,000 business plans for USCIS, I would agree with you. It's sometimes hard to convince them of what's right there in front of them.
Well, having written so many business plans, you would understand also that one of the pitfalls is understanding the industry. So when you come to people doing their own entrepreneurial project, it's not usually so straightforward as being a McDonald's or any kind of thing that you would think is simple. We have had all types of projects brought to us when it's their own business, from waste recycling to plastics to perfumery. To perfumery, yes. We had a project where somebody
just sounded fancy.
Obviously, you have your typical motels as well. But when it comes to businesses, there are different rules. When it comes to writing the business plans, that is.
Oh, certainly. I know that firsthand, especially when you're writing it specifically for USCIS. And for EB5, matter of hoe is just the minimal baseline. There's even much more you need to put in it just to make it easy for them to adjudicate.
Right. Well, here is one of the pitfalls that Rebecca and I have seen when people have come to us after they've received an RFE or even a denial and they have done their own business. They may have gone to a lawyer who doesn't charge too much and had a business plan done by one person without giving them all the details that they are supposed to give them. Of course, a business plan writer, no matter how good he is, can only work with the data and material he's given. And then either not got the appropriate corporate documents or obtained the corporate documents from a third party, which has absolutely no connection or they don't understand EB5. And then there are clashes. Right, Rebecca?
Like we tell all our clients, it's not just an entrepreneurial visa application that you're filing. It's not just an immigration. It's everything incorporated into one. You're looking at corporate documents. It's important to have your OA and all your corporate documents together.
Operating agreement?
Yeah, operating agreement. That's right.
You have to make sure, like you said, Mark, your business plan, not only does it conform to a normal business, you're not sending it just to the banks, but it's also going to USCIS for immigration purposes. So it has to conform with matter of hoe. So there's just different issues. And that's why it's important to have, even if you're working with different corporate attorneys or different business plan writer, to have that one attorney who understands all of it and can put it all into one package for USCIS.
Operating agreements, believe it or not, Mark, end up being the most critical of all documents when it comes, even though we put a lot of emphasis on business plans. At the end of the day, this is a business. This business is not just there to get you immigration. It has to be there beyond immigration. And when we have disputes, operating agreements, shareholders agreements, these are the ones, even without a dispute, these are the guiding documents which really have the power, the controlling power over the whole business.
You're right, Mona. I mean, we've seen it ourselves firsthand, issues with, for instance, a shareholders agreement. We've seen partnership with friends and seen things that could go wrong. Within just a few months, we saw a dispute, and unfortunately, parties are going into court. And it all goes back to having a well-crafted document. If one word is out of place, USCIS can come back to you, or even SEC can come back to you and could destroy an EB5 investor's petition.
That's right. This is the difficult part. It's not just EB5 that we are looking at. It's an actual business too. So yes, you just mentioned the scenario when we have a project where within a few months, the partners fell apart. They all put their own 500 in and pooled money together. Then they had a dispute, ended up in court. And the operating agreement was the controlling document. And that was not a well-drafted document. So, yeah, it's not just EB5. It's SEC, I don't think would be so involved when it's your own project, of course, because you're not doing an offering. But as far as controlling and moving forward with the business, you need proper corporate documents.
Well, Mona, Rebecca, let me ask you this. Is it faster to get the EB5 visa for those entrepreneurial projects?
Well, technically, it isn't supposed to be any faster. But in practice, we have seen some entrepreneurial projects get adjudicated within a year and a bit, at a time when other projects were taking 3-4 years to be adjudicated.
Yeah, and I think, Mona, the reason why maybe sometimes these cases are going through faster is, again, as we were talking about, it's the clarity of the documents and how well the project documents are done and how well EB5, the USCIS adjudicators can understand what the project is about and how it conforms with EB5.
Yeah, interestingly, Mark, I'm going to do a throwback. When we had Leon Rodriguez on the podcast, he mentioned that because initially a lot of the EB5 were just entrepreneurial documents, that the most fraud happens, as far as they see, where investor fraud with entrepreneurial cases, where somebody might be taking the money out earlier than they can because they do have control or they're not really putting in the jobs the way they are supposed to. And so I feel that in some cases, USCIS take longer because they are checking all of these details.
So what I'm hearing is it really depends. And because these entrepreneurial type projects, they're really I guess, almost a self-contained visa silo for an EB-5 petition. Everything that the adjudicator needs should be in there. They don't need to reference a larger project or regional centers, things like that. And that could be a strength if those documents are concise, have everything they need, and help the adjudicator make the correct decision quickly. Or it sounds like if there's things that are missing, Rebecca, as you said, if, a word is out of place, or perhaps they use the wrong word, like, not at risk, that would definitely be a wrong word, then that could certainly slow things down. So it really depends.
Yeah, I think what happens a lot of times, Mark, is that we see a lot of investors who try to file their cases on their own, or they find someone who lacks the expertise in the area, or again, they're getting, they think it's going to be cheaper if they use this corporate attorney and then get this business plan writer, and then maybe they will put the entire EB-5 package together. So that's the issues we're seeing, is that you need to have the expertise to file an EB-5. It's not a simple project. It's not a simple business that you're putting together. You have to remember, we tell investors all the time, it's a business, and you're trying to incorporate immigration into this. So we've seen, like I said, if it's a really good application, you could get it done fairly quickly.
Another interesting factor that we have seen lately, and this is something which we had not seen before, is the consulate coming back. Mm-hmm. Cases which have been approved here in the United States, going to the consulate, and the consulate coming back, questioning the job creation and questioning other factors on a direct. And they don't do that with a regional center project, but we have seen them do that with an entrepreneurial standalone project.
Yeah, it's the timeline USCIS taking, within it really matters what you say in your business plan, because these adjudicators are looking at, if you're saying that my project's going to be up and running in 2 years, and 2 years comes and you're at the consulate and they don't see any progress, they're going to question you. What's happening? Why isn't there job creation if you said it was going to happen in 2 years?
Yeah, the other thing is that not all business plan writers are the same. They're not all equal, no matter how good the data or whatever. This particular area, as we've always said, is so unique and it has so many nuances that you do need a business plan writer who has a familiarity with EB-5.
Yeah, Rebecca, it's what you say, but it's also what you show in the business plan. So if you're showing that there is, job creation, but you don't have, say, the floor plan of the business or the office space that to show that, how all these people can do their required job functions in that space, or leave that out altogether, that's going to be a big question in their mind as well. So not only do you have to say, but you have to show, and you have to show both graphically and quantitatively. They look for almost any excuse, I think, in order to throw the plausible question back at you for an RFE, or possibly annoyed.
Yeah. Again, I can throw examples out there all day. We're seeing the job creation where now I have investors coming back saying, oh, my business isn't taking off as well as I thought it would. Here we've created a business plan and they want to go a totally different way now. And I'm like, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's the whole material change issue. And you try to explain that on a business level to somebody who's struggling even to get 2 or 3 jobs. And yeah, it is tough.
Yeah. And so that's why when we speak to our investors or their entrepreneurs out there, Mona and I really go into details and question. It's important to know, what do you plan to do with this business? Are you sure you need 10 full-time jobs? So Mona, I know a lot of our clients, they think entrepreneurial visa, EB-5, you can only have direct employment, but that's not the case.
No, that's not.
What?
We have... You can have your own case, an entrepreneurial case, and rent a regional center and use a regional center.
Okay. Yeah.
So that you can count the indirect and induced.
Okay. So you have to rent a regional center. I thought without the RC, I'm like, what? How do you do that? But yeah, I think we explored that in one episode. Gosh, I think that was about 3 years ago. But the benefits of renting a regional center.
Yes, we did, but things have changed. And this is a continually, this particular area has been continually
changing.
Evolving. I think evolving. Yes, evolving is the right term. In practice, there are so many difficulties in having so many full-time jobs. For example, a clinic might come to us and they'll say, look, we can easily bring up 50, 60 new jobs. We need cleaners, we need, the receptionist, et cetera, et cetera. Then when we start really delving deeper, we can see, are you really going to hire your own cleaners, or are you going to contract with a company who are going to come and clean? Because if you're contracting with a company which is much cheaper and easier for you, then that is not a direct job. That's an indirect job. And then they start realizing how many jobs you can get which are indirect. And it would be much easier to use a regional center.
Mona, just to interject, it's also cost effective for the entrepreneur in the long run. As we've seen that, yes, you might be putting in a bit more investment and paying a bit more fees up front to put a regional center project together. But ultimately, at the end, you're not spending so much on those direct jobs or the salary at the end of the day.
Yeah, it all goes back to how much job creation really is there, and the whole premise of a regional center, which is to increase economic activity in the area. So if you have put a job, let's take something very simple, like a assisted living home, an assisted living home coming in and only requiring, say, 4 people, 4 investments, so they think they can easily have enough direct jobs. If they utilize a regional center, or if they go direct, they are still creating the same amount of jobs. They're still creating the same amount of economic activity. So that really shouldn't make much of a difference.
Oh, Mona, Rebecca, I know we've really gone down this path on the very first step, but I want to back up and cover what the steps are for someone to create their own project. Is it really any different than a typical EB-5?
The only difference is, Mark, is that you would be doing the project documentation. As Rebecca is going to point out, the source of funds portion is exactly the same as if you were filing in a regional center project.
Exactly.
So it sounds like it's really all the corporate documents that people would expect to have when starting a business that is going to employ people and get funds from investors and funds from banks, and basically all those documentation you need for those processes. That's what you would submit and supply, as well as all the immigration documents, the 526 petitions, the things that you don't need unless you're renting a regional center. And otherwise, the regional center takes care of it for the indirect jobs, is the economic analysis and indirect job impact and those sorts of things. You don't need to worry about those.
No, you don't need an economic report if it's a direct.
Correct.
But if you're going to have a project with a regional center that you're renting, then you will need an economic report. So perhaps we could discuss this on another podcast as well.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's, each investor is different. Each investor has a different project. Corporate structure will be different. Some might have a simple, someone might have a whole convoluted corporate structure. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's what is really needed for the investor.
Mark and Rebecca, I know we have been talking a lot about the various pitfalls and the issues that do come up in your own project, but it isn't that difficult to put your own project together as long as you have the right team there. If you have the right team and you have a good project, it's certainly something I would recommend to many entrepreneurs. Go ahead, do your own EB-5.
Completely agree with you, Mona. We've seen many successful projects.
Teamwork definitely makes the dream work if you have the right team. And of course, that starts with a good set of EB-5 attorneys.
I like that, Mark.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Well, Mona and Rebecca, thank you again for taking your time to inform the EB-5 Investment Voice listener and really address some of these concerns that we're hearing come in, such as, can I do my own project? And I think we've really started to explore that. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for being with us today on EB-5 Investment Voice. The topics presented in this podcast is informational in nature and is not to be taken as specific legal advice. If you have questions on the topics presented in this episode or other investment immigration needs, please contact Mona Shaw and Associates. Mona and her attorney staff can be reached at mshawlaw.com. That's mshawlaw.com. Make sure you don't miss our next episode focusing on a different aspect of the EB-5 program by subscribing to the podcast. While you're at it, leave us a rating on iTunes. If you really found this episode valuable, share it with someone else that could benefit from this information. Until then, I'll see you on the next episode of EB-5 Investment Voice.